Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to trace the really fascinating and often conflicting evolution of what early Christians believed happens after we die. It's this journey that pits two incredibly powerful ideas against each other: the resurrection of the body versus the immortality of the soul. I mean, it's the question, isn't it? What happens after we die? It has haunted humanity for millennia. And if you were living in the ancient Roman world, well, the answers were not great. They were far from comforting, really marked by this pervasive sense of dread about what was coming next. The philosopher Seneca, he just perfectly captured this common pagan fear. He wrote about the terror of being led into darkness, into a complete and absolute unknown. And that is the world, that's the backdrop that the early Christian view just explodes onto. It was a totally radical departure. It wasn't about an uncertain end. No, it was about a hopeful new beginning, an actual encounter with the divine. And this profound shift in perspective, it's what framed the entire epic debate that we're going to talk about. So, how did the first Christian thinkers even begin to tackle this profound question? Well, their first answer, and this is maybe the most revolutionary part, it wasn't about escaping the body. No, it was all about reclaiming it. Okay, so these early theologians, they had to untangle four huge interconnected problems. First, the immortality of the soul. Then, the judgment of individuals. Third, the final judgment, or what they called the parousia. And finally, the one that was probably the most culturally jarring idea of them all, the resurrection of the actual physical body. Now, you have to remember, this went completely against the grain of the popular Greek philosophy at the time. I mean, they often saw the body as just a temporary vessel, or worse, a prison for the soul. But then this group of thinkers from Asia Minor, we call them the Asian school now, they argued for something totally different. They insisted that the body wasn't just some disposable packaging. Nope. It was an essential part of who we are. And whatever salvation was, it had to include the body. Justin Martyr, he was a key voice from this school, and he used this really powerful analogy. He said, look, think about a seed. It gets planted, it decomposes in the earth, and then it sprouts into new life, right? Well, he argued our bodies are the same. They too would rise again by God's power, but clothed in incorruptibility. For him, this wasn't some philosophical impossibility. It was a divine, creative act. Then you have Irenaeus, and he took this idea even further. He saw humanity as a three-part being. You've got the flesh, the soul, and the spirit. And for him, these weren't separate parts you could just toss aside. No way. They formed this inseparable unit, a team. So salvation, it wasn't for some ghost-like soul floating around. It was for the complete, integrated person. And then there's Tertullian, who just fiercely rejected that popular Platonic idea of the body being a prison. He completely reframed the relationship, and it's beautiful, really. He called the flesh a companion to the soul. Think about that. They're partners in life. They share in everything, good and bad. So, he argued, of course they have to be resurrected together to face judgment and reward as a team. Okay, so this deep belief in the body's importance, it led a lot of these thinkers, including Justin and Irenaeus, to champion an idea called millenniarism. They basically envisioned a literal 1,000-year kingdom of Christ right here on earth, where the righteous would get to live in their physically resurrected bodies. I mean, talk about a complete validation of the material world and the body's place in the ultimate plan. But just as this very physical, body-centric view was really taking hold, a brilliant new voice emerges. And he comes from the intellectual powerhouse of Alexandria with a vision that was, well, radically different. And it would be profoundly influential. And here, this is the crucial turning point in the whole debate. A theologian named Origen, who was just steeped in Greek philosophy, he comes along and basically spiritualizes the entire concept of the afterlife. He completely shifted the focus away from the whole person and onto the soul, away from a perfected physical existence and toward a pure spiritual one. See, for Origen, your true self was your soul. The body, it was just a temporary, kind of heavy and ultimately disposable vessel. So for him, salvation meant getting rid of it, shedding this material form to achieve a higher, purely spiritual existence. The goal was to become, in his own words, like an angel of God, to completely transcend our physical nature. Now, this shift had huge implications. Origen just completely dismissed that whole idea of an earthly 1,000-year kingdom. For him, the end times, eschatology, it wasn't about some grand cosmic end-of-history event. Nope, it was a personal, internal journey. The whole focus was on the soul's moral progress as it shed all its material attachments and climbed its way back to its divine origin. So now, the Christian world is pretty much divided. You've got these two powerful competing ideas, a resurrected body on one side and a liberated soul on the other. It was going to take one of history's absolute greatest minds to come along and forge a new path, one that could somehow hold both of these truths in tension. And that person was Augustine of Hippo. He just masterfully builds this synthesis that would go on to shape Western thought for centuries. Okay, so here's what he does. Even though he was influenced by Platonism, he totally rejects its core idea that the body is a prison. He says, no, it's good, it's essential. In fact, he argued the soul has a natural appetite for its body, that it actually feels incomplete without it. And that powerful idea led him to his grand conclusion. Our final destiny has to be a complete restoration of the whole person. I mean, the sheer power of Augustine's idea was right here. He argued that even after death, a separated soul isn't fully content. It actually experiences a kind of delay from perfect bliss because it longs for its physical companion. What a concept! And it completely recentered the importance of the resurrection. Suddenly, it wasn't about going back to a flawed prison. It was the final, absolutely necessary step toward true, complete wholeness. So, Augustine's synthesis, it pretty much becomes the dominant view in the West. But Origen's more spiritual vision, that didn't just go away. It continued to profoundly shape Christian thought in the East. And what this did was create two distinct legacies, basically two different ways of looking toward the end. So in essence, you get two different traditions. The Eastern tradition, which followed Origen's lead, it tended to look inward. It emphasized the individual soul's personal mystical journey back to God. Meanwhile, the Western tradition, following Augustine, tended to look outward. It was much more focused on the grand cosmic drama of history, of judgment, and the end of the world as a huge historical event. So what's the big takeaway from all of this? Well, it's that the Christian concept of the afterlife was never just one single unchanging idea handed down from on high. Not at all. It was a dynamic, evolving, profound debate, a real intellectual journey where they were wrestling with the very nature of what it means to be human, the nature of the material world, and our ultimate destiny. And what's so fascinating is that this core tension, it's still deep within Western thought today. It leaves us with a question that just echoes through the centuries. What are we? Are we primarily spiritual beings who are just having a temporary physical experience? Or are our bodies absolutely fundamental to who we are? This ancient debate, believe it or not, still continues to shape our modern sense of self.